I think the biggest realization is that it's all a system. And, things don't act independently. Everything interacts together. And if we try to separate things out, like we do in agriculture, commercial agriculture most of the time, we're disconnecting everything. We think we can grow food, like whether it's chickens or cows or whatever, separate from the rest of the system. And once we do, we find we get diseases, we get, all kinds of problems, as well as being pretty cruel to what we're growing. But, in commercial agriculture, it's the same thing. We have these huge mile-long pieces of property, and we're growing, one crop. Well, when we talked earlier about diversity, when you have one crop, you're inviting all kinds of problems to come in. What we're finding, you have one crop, and anything that likes to eat corn, for example, what's it do? It finds this fields and fields of corn, so it comes in and it starts eating all the corn. So what do? We have to kill the insects that are killing the corn, so we pour pesticides on them, and in doing so, we pollute our food, we pollute the ground, and so we start this whole cycle where in a lot of commercial agriculture operations, we end up with sterile soil, and we just pour chemicals on it to try to get the plants to grow. Permaculture turns that around. And permaculture is just, and it's amazing design science that says once we can organize things in a method similar to the way nature does it, and you nurture the soil and all the life that's in the soil, you can't stop things from growing. And instead of just having one insect or what we call a pest come in, well, when you start mixing up your plants in a garden bed, you start finding that you're attracting all kinds of insects. You find the insects that like to eat the insects that like to eat the food that you have. So you come up with a balance. And that's really what life's all about, right? It's creating a balance. And that's what really drew me to permaculture and why I love permaculture. I mean, it becomes part of you after a while. This is what we're trying to teach people, especially here at Unity. When you start nurturing this plant, you're honoring everything about that plant. And the plant responds, When you appreciate some bacteria and fungus and little insects in the ground and the spiders and the snakes, you're honoring your creator. And in doing so, it honors you back by giving more than you could possibly ask for. That's what permaculture is all about, too. It's about design. It's not about... gardening is a big part of it. But it's all about creating systems that are resilient and that, I like to say, honors all life. So I don't try to kill things here. I try to nurture things. And the more diversity you have, just like in our human population, the more diversity we have, the stronger we are. And the sooner we realize that, the better off we're all going to be. Because, diversity is power, diversity is strength. And so that's one of the things I try to show here in the garden, and when I teach classes and teach kids, it's one of the things I really like to bring out, that it's our differences that make us stronger.
But the produce manager's name was Gabriel. He was just talking to us, and I said, yeah, we're probably going to buy this book.
It's one of the tastier ones.
Doug Elliott, I think it is. And he has this, it's a gardening technique. We would just garden, and we'd buy resources, and we would work and weed and do this and do that. And you'd get one or two tomatoes that the bugs didn't destroy, and this, that, and the other. We were growing them in the wrong season, and we didn't know. But anyway, he says, well, have you heard of permaculture? I said, what? Let me write that down. And then I went home and I started looking things up. There was not much. So around that citrus tree, I just put all those old branches that I cut. When I cut them, I dropped them right there. And eventually you can't even find them. This used to all be the same size pile as that, all along that fence. Eventually they'll all go away. And he talked about a thing called hugelkultur. Well, okay, so I went out and looked generic search on the web and couldn't find a picture to save your life. Just people describing them, that kind of thing. So I started building them kind of based on the descriptions and things like that. And I said, okay, hugelkultur, that's cool. And I spent probably until about 2013 before I did what's called a permaculture design course. And I thought, well, I know all about permaculture. This will be a shoo-in. I'll go get my course. I went down there, and even though it wasn't really the best course, I know that now in hindsight, it did open my eyes to an awful lot of things, and I started to learn stuff. And anyway, I finally got a hold of one of the books. We got a hold of Introduction to Permaculture. And my wife is a part of this because she was sitting in here, and I was asking her through the window, all right, read to me like on that one page what I have to do for layering, and it was layered gardens, and I did that. I did it all in a big circle out here. I came back from a month of that without doing anything to this garden. And remember, organic gardening, I'm constantly messing around trying to make things. The food in there, the kale, the broccoli, the lettuces, they were huge, tall as you. And I was like, what is happening here? I'm walking through a forest of food. I said, I've never seen this before in my life. And so I was like, I got to share this with everybody. And so the idea was that we were just going to go and install gardens for people everywhere. And so I did that for years, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. It's hard for me to even remember. It was so long. So I was running around installing gardens and just learning as much as I could, and anything that worked I would share, that kind of thing. So anyway, I found permaculture on accident from a guy named Gabriel, and it blew my life apart.
The older you get, the more you understand it. Gardening is a very good way to learn about life. The more you put into it, the more you get out of it. All these little cliche things, but you sit in it. You come out here and work all day, and then you sit and realize and look at what you've done. You raise kids. You teach about growing their own food. There's probably not a better way to teach about life than to teach somebody how to grow a garden. I'm 75. I was the only person left in my county that was in draft status, that was not in the military or had some other reason not to be drafted. So I didn't want to go crawl around the mud in Nahum getting shot at, so I joined the Navy. And I still wound up in Nahum on an aircraft carrier from here. But I came here in the Navy after 2 tours, got out here. My last ship was a fast frigate at Mayport. Got out here, was married, and we stayed here. These huge, they call them Mexican sunflowers because they look, back up, because they look like sunflowers. And here's a seed pod they leave. You can plant them by seed or what. The way that one got there is one of these got heavy from all the flowers laid on top or hanging on top. It hangs over to the dirt. If it touches the dirt, it starts growing roots, and started that one. If you let them go, they will take over a yard. So you got to be careful. So what you do is let them get like this and hack them off. Waist high, knee high, whatever. And you've got green mulch. Well, I told you, now I can't find one. So I've already seen small pumpkins like that big so far. And I had some last year. I bought a scale just so I could weigh them and find out how big they got. They were like between 10 and 15 pounds. Good sized pumpkins. People claimed that I had bigger ones than most people had. I don't know what I did other than grow them on wood chips. One of the easiest edible things to grow must be Irish potatoes. That's a purple Irish potato that I just stuck in the ground about a week ago. You wait till they start sprouting, and once they sprout, you can either cut pieces off of it so each piece has a sprout, stick it in the ground, and they start growing. It's a proven fact that people that work with their hands in the dirt are healthier than people that don't.
I'm from Norway, like that's what my passport says, but my parents were missionaries, so I grew up in New Guinea, which is like north of Australia, so in the tropics, and they worked with an indigenous tribe there, for 20 years. So all my whole childhood was, I just was observing how people farmed traditionally. They didn't bring in like chemical fertilizers, or they didn't have access to any of that stuff. So they and as a kid you just think, yeah, that's just how you farm, how they grow their food. But then you get exposed to how things are done over here, and you're like, I like that way better. So this is all what we call hugelkultur, which is where you bury logs and debris, basically woody debris, in the ground. So like starting out here, this was all just sand, and so I started, like I said, with a little 4x4 square, and it's turned into this. So there's probably about 6 like trenches that I dug gradually. Like I started here and gradually worked my way that way. And then other than that, just bringing in wood chips whenever there's a tree service in the area. Like I'll listen for if I hear a wood chipper down the street, I'll go down and ask them if they can dump the wood chips in my driveway, because they have to pay to haul it to the dump anyway. So usually they'll just gladly leave it here so they don't have to make that trip and pay money to dump it over there too. So we want to grow plants that thrive in our region, right? We don't want to necessarily try to force things to grow here that don't traditionally grow here. So like right now I do have potatoes, English potato, or regular white potatoes planted, but they only go for a couple of months here and then they'll be done. So like growing something like a taro plant, which is more a tropical starch, is much more adapted to our climate. Not that it necessarily was grown traditionally in Florida, but we look at analogous like parts of the world that have similar climates to ours, and see what do they grow in the Middle East, what do they grow in parts of Asia, because our summers are kind of more like a tropical summer. So we can grow things like taro and cassava and yams and other sweet potatoes, other starchy crops that do better here in Florida than up north. So so that's why I have like taro going, and it's like they're starting to produce. I'm mainly growing it out to produce more, so it's starting to shoot out little side shoots. If you clear an area and just leave it, stand back, in 20 to 30 years you'll have a forest there. But all along that process to getting there's been different plants that have come up and served different functions. And so it's kind of it's building the soil, it's building the microbial habitat to where at one day it can support that forest. They say like 90% of permaculture is observation. Like that's the whole thing about learning from nature and working with nature, not against nature. So it's just kind of, you start observing, what happens over time, and then we try to plug into that where we can.
There we go, that's a good one.
How does permaculture change the way I live? The way that I interact with the natural world seems more expanded in that what I'm looking at all the time is seeing what is balancing out, you know, what trees are flowering, what trees are fruiting, what animals are eating that fruit, what that tree can provide me and my family and friends. I grew up on 3 acres down in Fort Myers in Southwest Florida, and my dad's a carpenter, he's a builder, and I'm a carpenter here too. When I got here, there was nothing here. It was just barren white sand out here. There wasn't even grass, which I don't care about grass. It just shows you like how much life is back here happening. It was just like scraped clean when I got here. Amazingly delicious persimmons, and it's just now leafing out. And I noticed some flowers. There's a flower right there just now forming. It's really amazing that it's this early this year, how much flowers we have already on the fruit trees in March. It's really unusual. And we're gonna have a lot of fruit this year. I'm really excited about that. This is a fig tree. I just kind of look through that lens of this is another prized persimmon tree that is the productivity of the world, of the earth. It's just abundantly producing all the time. And we can kind of harness that power and direct it in which way we want it to grow. And we can learn from the cycles of everything. I'm learning the cycles of things it's always going, and we can tap into that by planting certain things, and then you have food almost all year round. And like with the fruit trees, I'm finding fruit, I'm getting fruit all year round from the different things. If you plant things that flower different times of the year and produce fruit different times of the year, you always have food. And the same with the plants and the vegetables and the perennials. It becomes really clear pretty easily when you get started. Like, yeah, this is where it's at. We need to grow more food and produce more of our own stuff. It's just really exciting.